Thanks so much, Andra, and thank you to everyone who's here with us today to talk a little bit about the science of reading in higher education. It's really my pleasure to bring this group of committed teacher educators together today for this presentation. I'm excited for you to hear a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing together and the journey of each of these amazing educators. So I'm going to kick us off. I'm Stephanie Staller. I teach part-time at Mount St. Joseph University in Cincinnati, Ohio. And joining me today are Stacy Hurst from Southern Utah University, Vicki Paquette from Colorado State University, Pueblo, Leslie Sharp from the University of Arkansas, Little Rock, and Rhonda Fritz from Eastern Oregon University. So our objectives today are, first of all, to explore why there's a need to focus on the science of reading in higher education. We want to introduce you to or remind you about the knowledge and practice standards from the International Dyslexia Association. We're going to highlight some of the national efforts that are underway around change and alignment to research in higher education. And along the way, we're going to share lots and lots of resources. And that's one of the things that I'm most excited about is the fact that now there are quite a few resources available to support folks who are moving towards extending the alignment of their teacher preparation courses with the reading research. One of the national efforts in this area comes from AACTE. They recently commissioned a report that lays out the roles of ed prep providers related to the science of reading. And I think their recommendations are really useful and helpful. In the resources at the end of the presentation, we have a link to their page. There's a webinar that you can access and the full report. These are just the 5 recommendations that come from that report. And what I like about this is the framing around support for teacher educators, support for teacher candidates, not just around developing their content knowledge, but also changing their instructional practices, making sure that there are opportunities for field work, for clinical practice. Again, not just the content knowledge, but applying that in real schools. And being able to do a little bit of alignment around some of the national policies, initiatives, and efforts related to assessment, instruction, and intervention. As I mentioned, the other national work that you should be aware of is from the International Dyslexia Association, who have put forth the knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading. There are 5 standards that you can see listed here on the screen that give some level of detail about what teachers who are teaching reading should know and be able to do. And I think probably the most helpful and sometimes forgotten part of the IDA knowledge and practice standards are actually the examples that they have in the back. It might be an appendix at the back of the knowledge and practice standards document. So for each standard or substandard, you can see examples of coursework expectations. So what might you expect to see in a college course syllabus? And then also examples of how that clinical work might happen, how teacher candidates might be supported to apply what they're learning in actual schools. So I just wanted to highlight that and point that out. This work is so critical, especially right now as we have national momentum around the science of reading. So many educators in the K-12 setting are working hard to make sure that all students have access to literacy and that all educators have the knowledge that they need to make that a reality. So we have a real moment in time, I think, to capitalize on. And when some of this effort started, there was a lot of finger pointing and a lot of blame, I guess, laid at the feet of higher education. And my experience at the time just right around the pandemic, right before the pandemic, was that I was meeting people like the ones you're going to hear from today who were already recognizing that perhaps they didn't have the knowledge that they needed about reading, and perhaps the way that they were preparing teachers wasn't in line with the reading research, and they were already taking it upon themselves to move forward in a direction to support their teacher candidates to be more effective reading teachers. So there was a group of us who joined together to form an alliance that we call Stars in Higher Education, Stronger Together, the Alliance for Reading Science in Higher Education. And we have ever since been joining together to do a variety of things that you can see listed here on the slide. We have formed a network. We have almost 1,500 people who are in one way or another connected to this work. We've been doing conference presentations together. We have held, I don't know, 4 or 5, I'm starting to lose count, which is wonderful, in-person convenings. The first one was connected to the Reading League conference back in 2022. And we'll be meeting again the day before the Reading League conference in 2024 in Charlotte, October 15th. We have published in a variety of professional publications about our efforts. We have a private Facebook group called Training Reading Rocket Scientists, where we interact and network and share resources. And we have a series of free webinars that are offered for teacher educators just about monthly. And a related effort is through the Reading League. Carrie Curto hosts a monthly community of practice. I think it's the third Friday of every month, where we interact as well. So those are just some of the things that are underway. If you are working in teacher prep in any way, shape, or form, full-time, part-time, as an adjunct, we would love to have you join with us. If you are working in a pre-K to 12 setting, and you are interested in supporting this effort and would have a practicum student or a student teacher in your setting, and you need to get connected to an ed prep provider that is like-minded, we could help you make that kind of a connection. So thanks for being here, and we are excited for you to hear the journeys of these 4 amazing educators today. So we're going to start with Stacy Hurst. And I don't see you on my screen, Stacy, but I bet when you unmute, I will see you.
I hope so. Or maybe not.
Oh, no, I see you now. There you are.
Oh, great.
Take it away.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to be here, especially happy to be joining these other educators and sharing our stories, which I'm sure anybody listening will find a lot of things that they can relate to in these stories. I will just tell you a little bit about where I teach, Southern Utah University. If you're not familiar with the West, we're 2 hours north of Las Vegas. Everybody seems to anchor that way. So we do offer bachelor's and master's programs in education. There are about 18 faculty members. I am one of the only literacy instructors, so I frequently say it's a program of one, but we do have about 400 students in our teacher education program, which has been around for a while. So we were a teacher's college to begin with. And then on the next slide, you'll see just some talking points as I share my journey. But the first one I thought to mention would be my experience as a pre-service teacher in my undergrad studies. I actually started out as an elementary ed major, but then I don't know, my prefrontal cortex wasn't fully formed. So I think I got a little frustrated that the program I was in wasn't academic enough. So I switched to a sociology degree. But I'm mentioning that because at the time, my minors stayed the same. So I had a minor in child development and a minor in reading, which was offered at the time. It's not offered in our state anymore. So even though I have 2 degrees, then I went back and finished my elementary education degree. And during all that time, I was always studying reading, and we had a lot of reading classes available at that point. So I felt like as I graduated that I would be I should be really prepared to teach reading. In fact, I graduated with my reading endorsement. So as I began teaching first grade, I noticed very quickly that there are a couple things about my sociology degree that really helped me out in education. And one was a knowledge of research. And I turned to the National Reading Panel very quickly in my early teaching degree, in my early teaching experience, sorry, because I was recognizing that in my classroom, my students were doing a really good job of the things I had been taught to teach, like learning, loving literacy and being excited about reading, but they really weren't able to decode well. And as I read the National Reading Panel report, I identified very quickly where my deficits were in my instruction. So that really helped guide me. Then I became a literacy coach and a reading specialist at my school. And that's where I started really, again, from my sociology background, probably noticing the impact that systems have on what we do as educators. And I was very lucky, which is also a strand throughout this journey. I was lucky to start teaching when the National Reading Panel had just published their report. I was lucky that I knew to read research. And then as I became a literacy coach, I was really lucky with the support from my administrator. We fully embraced the MTSS model, first at my school and then in my district. And that was a long time ago. So I think I was operating with the assumption that everybody was applying that model, but I learned differently later. One thing that happened that was very instrumental to me as I was a literacy coach was the NCTQ report had been published. And I don't remember the year, but one of the major newspapers in Utah had reached out to me to talk to me because the university I graduated from received really high scores on that report. So they wanted to talk to somebody who had come from that program and how I was applying. They did refer to it as the science of reading clear back then. And I remember during that whole interview, I was a little bit internally conflicted. I wanted to represent my university well, and I hope I did. But the whole time they were asking me the questions, I just kept thinking, but I didn't learn any of this in college. I learned all of this afterwards through reading research and on my own. So I remember that discrepancy. As I had the opportunity to work with teachers across the country, I was learning that I was assuming people were embracing things like MTSS and that everybody knew about the National Reading Panel and their findings. But I was very surprised that even 10 years later, nobody knew or it was slow to be adopted. And I think at that point, I realized I'm going to go upstream. I think I want to teach at the university setting. So again, this is where luck and systems kind of collide. I began teaching the year that Utah, around the time that Utah was really working on their comprehensive literacy legislation. And I am from Utah, but I am really impressed with that legislation. And it really helped me in my position as a university professor in many ways. But one way specifically was they were creating new competencies around the legislation for teachers, but also for pre-service teachers. As I began teaching, those weren't created yet for pre-service teachers. So I aligned my coursework with the teacher knowledge practice standards that Stephanie referred to, including those great examples of what that looks like in practical application in my coursework. So by the time the state did create those competencies, they were already aligned. I had to do very little in the way of adjusting. So systems become really important. I think alignment with research as well, and just knowledge of it. So the other thing that really helped me implement things the way that I felt like should be implemented was part of that legislation. Our pre-service teachers are required to take the Foundations of Reading test to get their teacher license. I had the support at my university to require that our students pass that test before they take their methods course. So again, I had university support, which was great. My current dean is a former literacy coach, and she has been nothing but supportive. So that's been very helpful too. And so it has helped to have that Senate bill. I was able to make a case. One of the challenges I had, the syllabi I inherited actually was very explicitly teaching 3Qing, shockingly to me. But I had the backing of that Senate bill to say, oh, look, we need to align our coursework. So it wasn't probably the, I don't know, the friction that it could have been because I had that systemic support. So one other thing that I realized in all of this, I was already involved outside of a university setting, but part of what I learned in my sociology, going clear back, my sociology courses, we're all part of a system. And we can either be acted upon in that system, or we can be an active participant. And so I think that changed my thinking about just sitting back and being told this is what you're going to do and be taking an active role in it. So a big part of that Senate bill is aimed at higher ed. So I began a literacy coalition with a lot of like-minded educators, and we've been able to impact some of the implementation of that literacy bill through that coalition. That not everybody has to start a coalition, but there are ways that you can share your voice. One thing that we were able to impact is the appointment of Dr. Elsa Cardenas Hagen on our panel of 6 that has a very long reach into higher ed. We were able to have a voice in what the cut score should be for the Foundations of Reading test. So I just encourage you to get active, then find your people. And we've said this before when we've been talking about the stars in higher ed group that Stephanie also mentioned. I cannot say how grateful I was to, this is luck too, that I found that group right about the time I began teaching, because I had a lot of support and resources and just fantastic conversation continued to this day that really impacts my teaching. And I do tell my students, I love them, I'm there for them, but I'm really there for their future students. So that's been able to give me that encouragement and support and resources to help keep my focus on that end game. So legislation is fantastic. Be a voice where you can with that, because it will impact what you're teaching, but also help on the implementation of it. Passing legislation is one thing, implementing the other thing. One thing I will mention from that too, part of that legislation was the requirement of letters training for our in-service teachers. And previous to that, I was having a very hard time finding practicum experiences that would be aligned with the coursework. So it was really fantastic as teachers started to take letters training, and I was coming to them and proposing, we want my students to come here and do this. And we were suddenly speaking the same language. And I was less concerned that my students would see practices that were not aligned and become part of that system that we all kind of fell into as we started teaching. So I'm encouraged about all of the things that are happening. I'm so grateful for the colleagues that you're about to hear from too, and look forward to learning more about their journeys as well. So thank you for this time.
All right. My name is Vicki Paquette, and I am an assistant professor at Colorado State University in Pueblo, Colorado. So we're part of the Colorado State University system. Our sister school, the big school, is in Fort Collins, but we're in Pueblo, Colorado. We have bachelor's, master's, and a doctoral degree. We actually started our doctoral degree about a year and a half ago in educational leadership, and it's grown like crazy. We have Colorado licensure in 24 different areas. We are currently at 10 faculty members. This is the first time we've had a full staff in several years, so we're very excited. And we have about 400 students in the teacher education program. As part of the CSU system, we also have an extended studies program. We have a lot of online master's students, so it's kind of hard to gauge how many we actually have, but about 400 students. So to tell you a little bit about my journey, I'm sure as many of you have also experienced, I grew up in a whole language approach, and then I was trained in balanced literacy, although one of my professors was a proclaimed whole language individual as well. And I finished up my bachelor's degree and started a master's degree in reading right away. because I quickly learned that I don't know how to teach reading. So I did my master's degree in reading and I finished that and I still didn't know how to teach reading. So I was in the classroom doing the best that I can, supposed to be one of the, you know, most highly qualified person in my school to teach reading, and I still was feeling very inadequate at doing that. My husband and I started a family, and so I took a step back from teaching in the classroom, and an opportunity kind of fell on my lap to teach at the university. And so I was teaching what I knew, which was balanced literacy. Well, we have several districts around us, and one of the districts, their district literacy coach reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd just like to sit down for coffee one day." And so we went out for coffee, and she showed me stuff that she had been learning about. And so she showed me Scarborough's rope and the simple view of reading. And I was like, okay, great. That sounds wonderful. So I put a couple slides in my PowerPoints and figured did that. But later, a few months later, she reached out to me and said, "Hey, we'd really like to invite you to this professional development that we're doing with our teachers." And I made it very clear to her, like, I'm happy to go to that, but I can't teach my students your curriculum because our students from the university graduate and they go to all different kinds of districts, but I'm happy to go. And so I did, and a lot of my former students were all sitting in the audience, and we got through day one, and I was like feeling pretty good about myself. And thinking, okay, all former students, you should know this stuff. Then we got to day two, and I was kind of slunking down in my chair, like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Later found out that it was very much, she was the lady who was doing the professional development was a national letters trainer. She was not teaching letters specifically, but it was very much like letters. So I was driving home on day 3 or 4 of that professional development, and I called my dean and I said, I know what we're missing. We're missing a linguistics class. Our students don't have any knowledge of linguistics. And so he said, we'll write it up and we'll propose it. So we did that. And a couple years later, I was teaching linguistics. There's an additional course that was required for most of our students. I was also working on my doctoral degree, and as part of an internship, I was with another school district in Colorado. So similar to Stacy, that things just kind of collided at the right time. Was going through an amendment to their READ Act. And as part of that, all of the K-3 and special educators and literacy specialists had to have be certified in order to teach reading. And so this particular school district had chosen letters training as their ability to get their teachers certified to teach reading. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And so the district allowed me, because I was doing an internship with them, allowed me to piggyback on letters training. And so I did units 1 through 4 with that school district. And then my university paid for me to finish out 5 through 8. Then I just started at that, I had a huge turnaround, like, oh my gosh. And I just started revamping courses actually right in the middle of the semester. Because I just didn't feel like I could go let my students be taught the wrong way any longer. And I had to start immediately. And so I started revamping my courses, and it took a good year to get them to a pretty good place. I'm continuously revamping courses. Right now I'm going through the IDA accreditation. Like Stacy, I'm kind of like a department of one. I am the only literacy teacher, reading teacher at my university. So I'm doing this on my own, which comes with its challenges, but is also good in other ways. So that brings me to the challenges. There are other philosophies of teaching reading in my department. I have one colleague who is very much whole language and says that and tells her students that. And then I have most of my other colleagues, although they don't teach literacy, they are more in line with balanced literacy. I don't feel like they ever undermine me on purpose. They are very respectful of my position in the department. They think of me as the expert on reading and language and literacy. But there are things in their courses that sometimes do undermine what I am trying to accomplish. So that's been difficult. They have come to me with questions and whatnot, and we've had good discussions. We have a really good relationship with one another, and I feel like we've come a long way. The other thing is fieldwork in the local school districts. Colorado does require that all schools are using a structured literacy program for their curriculum. That doesn't mean that it's happening. I think they all have purchased this, but not all of the schools are using explicit systematic diagnostic instruction in their schools. And so trying to get my students into classrooms where they can see and also be integrated into the instruction of these of literacy is not always the best. So trying to find really good teachers that are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that my students can see that what I'm teaching is aligned with what they're seeing in the classroom has been a challenge. It's getting better. Actually, the very first school district that I worked with that had me come to their PD has had a lot of administrative changes. But they are now they have adopted UFly across the district, and they are committed to making sure that that is done well. And so I'm excited to have my students in their classrooms. So suggestions for that, as I've gone along this, is just make sure that you're really doing your research, staying on top of the research, making sure that what your understanding is in line with what is actually out there. Also align your courses to make sure that what they're getting foundationally is needed for the next class, etc. That there's so much to teach. So making sure that we're not overlapping too much, but that we are aligning everything to make sure that our students are getting what they need. I found book studies are really fun and helpful. The Reading League in Colorado has had a couple of book studies that I've joined in on Facebook. There's also some book studies. So it's fun to still have my kind of toe into what's happening in the classrooms, because a lot of the teachers a lot of the participants in the book studies are actually in the classrooms, or their literacy coaches in the schools. And so just hearing what's happening in the school is helpful as well. And then look for collaboration opportunities and attending conferences, such as this one. STARS HE has been nothing but incredibly helpful and supportive, and giving me resources and suggestions and ideas to help me better my courses. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie, Stacy, and Vicky. Great learning about all of your stories. So I'm Leslie Sharp from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. At our university, we have bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees and 6 graduate certificates. We right now have about 12 faculty members, although we have been given the opportunity to hire new people. So we're doing that, and we're very excited about it, bringing new people with some different ideas. We currently have about 314 students in our teacher education program. So my talk today will be a little different because my journey started as a school administrator. I had already taught in Oklahoma for a number of years, but then I became a school administrator and then I actually moved to teaching in Arkansas, and then started got my master's degree, and then started being an elementary an elementary principal. So my first turning point that I will talk about was when I was a first principal in an Arkansas school district. I wrote an early reading first grant with my literacy coach, and she was fantastic. And that's when I learned about the Big Five: the phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, through the National Reading Panel. Never heard of it before, didn't ever have any of that instruction or support when I was getting my bachelor's degree in Oklahoma in elementary education, nor did I ever experience this in the 13 years I taught in Oklahoma at elementary school. So that was my first knowledge of the science of reading, according to the National Reading Panel. From there, I became very involved in rewriting in the dyslexia law in Arkansas, and it was published in 2013, and I was then working at a large urban district. The district I was at before was a small suburban district, actually almost rural. It wasn't really suburban. So, but it was right next to Bentonville, Arkansas, which is a huge thing. If you know Walmart, that's where it's from. So anyway, one of the things that we did in this urban district that I was then working in was we gave everybody, because of the dyslexia law, everyone in K2 had to have the dyslexia screener for all students in K2. And what we found in this district was that over half of our students screened in the elementary buildings. We had, I think, 13 school buildings, elementary buildings, had characteristics of dyslexia. So as a, elementary team, principal team, we began looking with our teachers at our curriculum instruction practices and wondering what is going on. Okay. So, as a school leader, I began doing some research in curriculum instruction, digging into the research for effective practice and solutions. And I found one that I brought to the district, and it was from Linda Mood Bell, Learning Processes. And I invited my colleagues to join me. The district brought in Linda Mood Bell, trained us all, and we began a pilot with elementary schools that wanted to take part. So my school was part of that, and we piloted seeing stars and visualizing and verbalizing. You might have heard of that before. So, and the results were amazing. But the practices at that time were not termed Science of Reading, SOR. So my next turning point was when I went from being a principal to an assistant superintendent. And it was my job to take our dyslexia program that we had already been created because of the laws in Arkansas. Things had to be done on a certain time frame to create a new one because it wasn't working. So I needed to reinvent it and help look at evidence-based practices, intervention services across personnel, schools, and district. Now, this is a small suburban district in Northwest Arkansas. So within this initiative, I discovered after doing some deep data dives that that our students were very low in the reading achievement at all grade levels, all the way from elementary through high school. At that time, my son was in the 9th grade. He had just started high school, and their scores were not good, even though we were a very low poverty district. Only 42% of students in this district were poverty. I'm not saying that is required, but it was really an aha moment for me as an assistant superintendent. So, and we had lots of engaged parents, and we just had everything that we should have as a district to be able to, have high reading achievement. So this is when our group of administrators got together, and we started looking at the work of Dr. David Kilpatrick, first with the essentials of reading, assessing reading, preventing, overcoming reading difficulties. And then that led us to looking at the Equipped for Reading Success, the curriculum. So a comprehensive program for developing phonemic awareness was that curriculum. And so we, at the same time, our teachers within the district were receiving Arkansas RISE training, which is the second component besides moving all your things to science of reading. They were receiving this training, as so was I. So that was the next turning point. So the next one was me leaving administration and going back into the classroom as a literacy interventionist. So when I did this, I had my first RISE training as a teacher and not an administrator, the Reading Initiative for Student Excellence. And the first group of teachers to receive this in the district that I was working in, which was Little Rock School District. This was all because of the Right to Read Act and the dyslexia law and those kinds of things happening within Arkansas. So all our K-12 in our K-12 system, we're given options depending on the grade level to teach to develop proficiency or an awareness of signs of reading. So elementary teachers are required, as Stacy was talking about, to take the Foundations of Reading exam. So they have, in 2017, that's when that became law. So every new teacher has to have passed that exam before they can get their license in Arkansas. So with all that being said, when I was an interventionist, we were still using balanced literacy curriculums, but I was able to bring Dr. Kilpatrick's curriculum, Essentials for Reading Success, into my work with my students. I taught second and third grade students knitting intervention and reading and most of my students were second language learners. So I gave them the PAST assessment, and I used his 1-minute exercises and the work that he did according to the assessment progress where they were. And I worked with them for that whole year. Okay, so the last thing in my turning points was moving from the interventionist position to the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And now I'm the elementary education person program, and I've been there since 2020. So we're very small, and I only have one other colleague that actually works with me in my program. So I understand what it's like to do this by yourself. So in this position, I was given the course Integrated Literacy and Language 1 to teach. We had no textbooks in the elementary program because people felt like the students can afford them. I looked into the requirements to be met in the syllabus that, they just give you the syllabus when you start teaching normally. And what I saw was intensive science of reading that I had to teach. And it seemed like we had 5 literacy classes at that time. It seemed like that I was the one that was teaching all of the science of reading in one class. So it was very challenging and very difficult when my students would come from other classes that were teaching balanced literacy into my class, and then I would just have to reteach everything. I remember one of my students stood up one time and said, "So what you're saying to us is what we learned in this class, we just need to forget it. We just need to forget it and start over." And I'm like, well, as a new person, I wasn't going to say yes, absolutely, but that's really what needed to be said. But things have changed, and we have come a long way since then. So I later learned that a specific course, Foundation of Reading, was one of the 5 literacy courses where the students were taught. They were taught science of reading in that course, but then they had another course in between that I was just referring to, where that sort of confused them. They had a balanced literacy course with the foundations course, and then they had my course. So we're all confused. So we don't really know what we're doing here. And we weren't graduating students that were passing the Foundations of Reading exam either. Since that time, our university has gone from an F on NCTQ to an A. So we've made some progress. But what I did for myself, because I was pretty much the lone person doing this, I became a member of the Reading League and started attending the conferences in 2020. Through this professional development, I started adding to my knowledge base of science of reading, research and practice, and learning everything I could about literacy from literacy experts and practice and around the country and in the world to help me teach my students. This is when I reached out to Stephanie Staller from St. Joseph University in July of 2021 about their work. She gave me virtually everything, their monosyllabi, and I began to references for textbooks because we had none. So, and I made a connection with Dr. Amy Murdoch as well. So this is all of this. I'm saying all this to be said that you might be in the same position that I am, and you might be the only one perhaps put in that position where it's time to make those changes, but it can be done now. So, I've sort of started that movement within my program, and I've also, we're still working on it. I've asked Stephanie to help me again, help me to align my courses. So currently in our School of Education, we're in the process of aligning the 3 undergraduate, there are now 3 literacy courses to reflect the structured literacy practice in the K-6 classroom, because our certification is K-6 in Arkansas. And this fall, we're hiring a new faculty member, yay, reading faculty that's going to join us. And I can't wait. I'm going to meet her on Friday. So I can't wait for her to join me in this work. because it's very difficult to do, as you will find if you're starting this journey, if you don't have like-minded people and if you don't have people who can take the time to work with you. So I would say challenges when you're on your journey, you're going to question your knowledge, as Vicki said, and understanding of it, because I wasn't taught anything but balanced literacy, and I wasn't practicing anything but balanced literacy when I was a teacher. Okay, I didn't even know about this until I became an administrator and then had to do some work and do some digging. So you're going to you're going to question yourself, to deliver the instruction the way that follows the science, because in my case, like I just said, I'm sure that you might have had the same experience. I wasn't taught to teach based on the science. I just went in the classroom and did what I was told to do in the districts that I work in, based on balanced literacy and whole language. That's just what they were doing. So other challenges are faculty with balanced literacy philosophy still working with you, research practices associated with balanced literacy as well. So district and school partnerships that continue to follow balanced literacy philosophies and practices, even though they have the curriculum that they have adopted, they're not following it. And I say that because of putting my students in those places, as Vicki said. So another thing is finding the time to bring everyone together to collaboratively do this work. So that with that, I will say that don't feel like you're in this by yourself, because reach out to people, experts like Stephanie, and get involved in all these entities that have been described to you, and it will help you. You will not feel alone, right? Okay, so thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to all of you. It's fun to hear again how we all sort of ended up in the same spot. And it's also fun to hear how we have so many similarities in our backgrounds. And I'm sure many of you listening will relate to that as well. I am at Eastern Oregon University, which is on the far eastern side of Oregon, actually closer to Boise, Idaho, than to anywhere you might know in Oregon. And we are a very small university. We have about 15 faculty members, and we offer bachelor's and master's programs in education. We don't yet offer a doctorate, but that's something we've been thinking about and batting around. We have about 200 students that go through our initial teacher preparation programs and our literacy endorsement program. So I have I think when you hear my journey and my turning points, you will identify with at least some of those. I was trained in elementary education and graduated in 1992. And at that time, whole language was very big. It was the only thing that we were taught. And I remember my reading methods class I absolutely loved, because every day he read children's books to us, and it was just great fun. And we learned all this great literature. And I really resonated with whole language because I was a precocious reader myself. So it really made sense to me that if I just expose kids to all this great literature, that they too will figure out how to read. And when I started in my first kindergarten classroom in 1992, it very quickly came crashing down on me. My kids weren't learning to read. They weren't picking up letter sound associations in the way that I thought they should. But I also was taught, give them time. Leo the late bloomer, that if we just give them time, they'll figure it out. So unfortunately, I sent this group of kindergartners to a first grade teacher who probably was wondering, did we teach anything in there? And the answer was probably not. We did read a lot of great books. We sang songs. We baked cookies. I mean, it was great. We had a great time, but I don't think that those kids left with what they needed. I did leave that position and moved back to my hometown when a Title I reading position opened. And I loved reading. So I thought, great, I'll take this job. And I was very eager to head home. I spent 4 or 5 years in that position, really frustrated. I was required to get my reading endorsement to do that. So I began that process too. And ironically, I started that process at Eastern Oregon University. And that first year, that first summer, I took some courses And I thought, oh, good, now they'll actually teach me how to teach reading. And they put me in this practicum where they gave me some students in a summer school and a pile of books and no direction, and just said, here, spend time with them, teach them to read. So in my frustration, I was like, well, this is obviously not going to give me what I need. So I went back to where I got my bachelor's degree to get my master's, thinking, okay, we didn't learn it in our bachelor's, but surely the master's in reading will teach me how to teach reading. And just like others have said, I finished that master's program. It says reading on my diploma, and I still had no idea how to teach a child to read. So I bounced around in different classes, and through that, during that same time, I was raising my own children, and my son was really struggling to learn to read. And I became very frustrated that here I am, a teacher, I can't even help my own child learn how to read, let alone all of these other children that I've been tasked with teaching to read. So like so many have talked about, it ended up being my own self-teaching on finding out as much as I could about dyslexia at the time, when we learned that that was probably what Trent was dealing with. At first, I was very skeptical, because in my program, they had also told us that dyslexia wasn't a real thing and that there really wasn't anything we could do. So when the diagnosis first happened, I was like, these doctors clearly don't know what they're talking about, because I learned that wasn't a real thing. But as I dove in deeper and found out more about how we could treat dyslexia, I realized we had to do something different in teacher prep. And that's when I started my doctoral program at University of Oregon. I actually, even though I had been a general education teacher for 19 years, I went into their special education program because I wanted to learn more about prevention and intervention of reading difficulties, and that's where it was happening. It was not happening on the general education side at that time. So I got to work with some amazing researchers and some amazing educators, and learned a ton about teaching adults, and got my first job here at EOU in 2014. I walked into a very balanced literacy campus, and I actually was hired as a generalist. I was not hired as a reading teacher at all, but was allowed to teach one early literacy class at the end of my first year. But all of the other courses were taught by someone else, and it was a very balanced literacy approach, and kind of like what Leslie talked about. When they did start letting me take early literacy courses on, we just served to really confuse them, because I was definitely teaching them a different approach than they were learning in any of their other literacy classes. And like many have also said, the placements that we had were not backing up anything that I was teaching either. So we really struggled with putting students in early literacy placements that were supporting what I was teaching in my courses. So in 2020, I took on a sabbatical, and my task and what I sought to do was create a reading clinic where my students could take what they were learning in those early literacy courses and practice that in our clinic. And as I was planning for this, and of course you can probably tell that was a pandemic, so I no longer was able to go to any reading clinics anywhere. So it was all online discovery, trying to figure out how we could make a clinic that would work for us at EOU, and found the DC reading clinic. And when I started reading about this clinic, it really was a teacher training clinic where they were having their teachers come in. They got paid a stipend to work for 10 weeks in this clinic with students who were struggling readers, and take a training right along with it. And then it dawned on me, if I trained the teachers in our area, I would no longer have this need for a reading clinic where my students would practice what they were learning. And so the reading clinic took more of a turn toward teacher training than I initially expected to do. In Eastern Oregon, it's very, very remote. It's a huge geographical area. And the resources for families to get supports for kids is not there at all. So I really thought it was going to start out in that realm of helping families and helping kids get supports that they needed. But with that shift to teacher training in the beginning, I started to think I can make a bigger impact by training these teachers. So also during that sabbatical, I started working with one of my other literacy faculty who came from a balanced literacy approach. I started working with one of her children, and her child had been held back. And so I asked her, I said, I'm on sabbatical. I haven't been able to work with kids very much. Could I work with your child? And she gladly let me do that. She initially said, let me know when you think I should start the special education process. And it was very clear within a couple of weeks that this child just needed to be taught. And she was taking off. And that started conversations with the rest of our faculty here on campus. And there are 4 or 5 of us that have literacy backgrounds. And like I said, mostly they were all balanced literacy when I arrived. But that experience and this development of the reading clinic opened up the conversations, and we started talking more about literacy and about reading. And also during that year, another lucky piece, like Stacy was talking about, I got involved with Portland Public Schools, who had just implemented letters training for their teachers. And they said, hey, we'll give you letters to any faculty who wants to take it. And so a couple of us did it together. And so we were able to continue those conversations and talk about how we could shift our courses to make sure they were aligning with the science. It was challenging to have people coming from those different perspectives, but we also learned so much about how much we could teach each other. And I think the biggest learning point for us was really looking at where do we have common ground? Where can we learn from each other? And can we do that as a team? And I think the fact that it took me 7 years to make much big change at the university was really frustrating at the time, but also that was such a critical time for that relationship building that I needed to do with those faculty that I was working with. If we hadn't had that time, and if I had just come in right away and just said, you're all doing it wrong, we need to do something differently, that would have not been accepted very well, and it probably would have shut down the whole process. So I think when we learned what we could learn from each other, and we continue to learn, I'm super excited that now I have a team of about 5 people, including a couple of adjuncts that are really fantastic, that have really helped us to ramp up what we're doing. The more eyes we have on our literacy program, and the more people that can say, hey, you know what, I think this might work better here, instead of, like everyone else has said, I started off as a lone wolf, and that is really a hard place to be. So having this team that we've now built is such a benefit to our students and to their future students. So I think that's such an important piece of this building process. We now attend conferences together, we have great conversations, and we are really moving our literacy program forward. We're hoping to start the accreditation process with IDA this year, and hoping that we'll see this spread across the state. I served this last year on a governor's council for higher education, and on teacher preparation, and trying to shift that for the rest of the universities in Oregon. And we're just now finishing up our recommendations for new standards. And those new standards are going to be a difficult implementation. So we're trying to take cues from some of these other states that are far ahead of us in terms of that work. But I'm hoping we can replicate what happened in our tiny little university and help others in other universities to follow that same process. So I do think it's super important that we lead with compassion for each other. One thing that was really clear with one of the faculty members here, you know, she had been trained by folks here at this university who were really on the whole language balance literacy side. And she respects and it was really hard for her to go, wow, I don't want to come at this as us against them. So that was really helpful for us to bring that together. So I'm hoping by leading with that compassion for each other, finding our common ground, and really working on building relationships, that we can see this across the whole state, and what everyone else is doing in these other states can be replicated as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your stories and your journey. So many good nuggets for folks who might be in similar positions as you were sharing there. We have a couple of slides that we've included with some resources, places where you can go to find additional supports, and you can find some of the things that have been mentioned in the presentation. I particularly want to call out the Reading League's Compass. There's a section of the Compass for ed prep programs, and it's really a treasure trove of resources, as is the IHE team menu on the Evidence Advocacy Center. Both of those are really wonderful clearinghouses for all kinds of resources that can help teacher educators who are on this journey. And the STARS Alliance, which these wonderful educators are all part of, they're actually leaders within that organization. There's a link for anyone who would like to join us. I mentioned our upcoming event, the October 15th pre-conference, the day before the Reading League Fall Conference in Charlotte. And so I've included the link where you can register for that event as well. Okay, I think this brings us to the time where we have an opportunity for questions. So I don't know if Andra.